Okay, let's take a look at some of the tools that are used for tightening nuts and bolts and for driving screws. So the first thing I want to say is that you should never use a pair of pliers on a nut and bolt because they're only going to tear or maul that up. I mean, maybe if you're stuck on an island and you're trying to MacGyver something, and pliers are the only thing that you have available, then by all means. But in the real world, we want to choose a drive system that's going to minimize the chance of us marring the surface of our fastener. And so the next step up from a pair of pliers is what's often generically referred to as a crescent wrench, but really it's more properly called an adjustable wrench. And so that allows us to adjust to accommodate a wide range of different sizes of nuts. But the problem with crescent wrenches or adjustable wrenches is that even if it's a really high quality adjustable wrench, unless your nut is sitting all the way down to the bottom and is properly snugged in place, the likelihood of the jaws spreading slightly and causing wear or galling of the surface of that fastener is highly probable. So this is what's called an offset adjustable wrench so that you can get into tighter places. Here we have a standard adjustable wrench, and these are rated in terms of their minimum or maximum capacity. And again, I just want to I urge you to be certain that if you are using an adjustable wrench, that it is sitting all the way down into the bottom of the mouth of that wrench when you're trying to tighten or loosen that up. This is called a monkey wrench, or at least that's the name I know it by, and it works very much like other adjustable wrenches and allows you to be able to bear on at least two sides of that fastener. So the fact that we can only bear on two sides means the load is all being put on that through this section here. And so to get better purchase or to have more evenly distributed force on a fastener, we may choose something like what's called a box wrench. And you'll find that box wrenches or open end wrenches will be sized for the two most common nut sizes that individuals work with. So in that sense, you can have one wrench that is applicable for two different sizes. Here you can see this is an open end box wrench that is a half-inch open end box wrench on one side, and then the other side it has what's called a pointed ratchet. And so you find these in 8 points and 16 points, and again, this is engineered or designed to have a precise correspondence between a specific diameter of fastener so that it is pinning or posting up on every one of the high points, giving you more bearing surface on that fastener to more effectively tighten that. And this one has a little lever so that left is loose, right is tight, or you can flip it over and it goes the opposite way, and has a slight offset again to get you into tighter spaces. In a mechanic's toolbox, you often find that they have these wrenches, which have an even more dramatic offset on them. And again, this is about allowing you to be able to reach into tight spots where you wouldn't necessarily be able to reach into with a flat wrench. Then we have what are called ratchets, and ratchets work with sockets. So left is loose, right is tight. This is an 8-point socket that's used for square drives. Larger sockets are typically used with larger ratchets, and the three standards for ratchet drives are 1/2 inch, 3/8 of an inch, and 1/4 of an inch. And again, these are scaled for different types of jobs. But there are adapters that can be used that will allow you to transition from 3/8 and reduce down to that smaller size socket like 1/4 inch. There are also extensions that are designed for 1/2 and 3/8 of an inch and 1/4 inch that allow you to be able to reach further with that socket, so that again you're able to get into a depth that you couldn't necessarily reach without that. We also have what are sometimes referred to as breaker bars that allow us to be able to rotate at 45, 90, again, to be able to reach into areas that we couldn't necessarily reach otherwise. And here you see an extension that has a spring built into it so that you might be able to reach into an awkward angle to loosen or tighten up a nut or bolt. And some sockets are specifically designed to be able to be used with things like spark plugs. So deep well sockets are long sockets like this that allow you to be able to reach over the top of the shoulder of this spark plug in order to be able to install that when it's out of reach. Last but not, I'm sorry, I got a couple more things to show you. Here we have a offset that allows you again to be able to get into challenging or tight spots. Sometimes you'll find these with a size socket end on them, and sometimes you'll simply find them as having a female receiver on it and a male receiver on the other side, like this guy, so that you can mount a socket on top of that. And last but not least, we have these specialty sockets, which are used with a tool called an impact driver. So you're most familiar with impact drivers from going to have your tire changed at a car shop. And I think most everybody knows the sound of that brr, 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 wee, brr, brr, wee, which is the air-powered pneumatic impact wrench that's used for loosening lug nuts and tightening lug nuts to affix your tire to your axle. And these are different in that they are made out of a higher grade of material that can sustain the impact of that tool's use. And so that's achieved by a higher grade of material and a thicker wall around the outside edge. A conventional socket used on an impact driver is highly likely to split when you're trying to use that. So these hardened impact drivers are just another option out there for us. This little device is used with these impact driver sockets, and the function of this is that nuts can often get frozen in place when they're exposed to the elements. If they get all crudded up and rusty, it's next to impossible to remove those without using what's called a penetrating fluid, which is a kind of oil that gets in there and helps bust up that rust. But this guy gets a socket mounted into the end of it, an impact socket, and then it's rotated into the loosening or tightening position, and then you come in with a hammer on the end of that and hit it, and it causes the force of the tool causes a spring and a cam to engage to loosen or tighten nuts that are frozen in place. And last but not least, we have this guy, which is called a nut buster. And this is, if you have a nut that's frozen in place and you're unable to remove that nut, you can actually take this tool and seat it over the top of the nut that is frozen in place, and then tighten this down, and this chisel in will come in and split that nut in half to allow you to be able to remove that. Oh, and lest I forget, these little multifunction wrenches like this will often come with tools. So this came with an oxyacetylene welding kit. So it has all of the corresponding openings that are most commonly used along with this particular torch set. And there you can see it's capturing that nut on 3 sides. Most of the wrenches that come along with tools, like this is a wrench for a chainsaw, have multifunction. So on this side, it has a socket for loosening the bar, so you can adjust the length of the tension on your chainsaw's chain. This side is used for installing and deinstalling spark plugs when you're replacing them. And then it's got a screwdriver end on it, which corresponds to the slotted screw that's used for fine-tuning the tension on that chain. Most of the wrenches that come along with your tools you buy, like grinders, will come with these kind of cheap, thin, flat wrenches. And fact of the matter is that they may serve you well for a while, but because they're so thin, they're prone to towing out, and then you're going to end up stripping out the screw that's on that tool, which is probably the more important and more costly part to replace. And last but not least, we have hex keys or Allen wrenches. We talked about those as being used for socket head screws like this. Although fractions are what we are commonly talking about when we're working here in the U.S., there's a whole world of metric fasteners out there, and where we have a national course and a national fine standard for our thread pitches, they instead have a much more logical system, which is the number of threads per millimeter. So they have, 0.5, 0.75, 1.0, 1.25, 1.5, so it's a lot easier to understand. And then they use the designation of millimeter, 8 millimeter, 6 millimeter, 10 millimeter for the diameter of that fastener.